Hey dorks, we've all got our favorite games. Some people like Quake, some like SimCity, some even like Fortnite. Personally, I like the Dark Souls series, but there's another game I like even more. It's available for many platforms and goes by many names, but the one you're probably the most familiar with is SETUP.EXE. There's just something about installing operating systems that scratches the itchy part of my brain. In my first video on the channel, I tried to recreate the PC I built in 1997. At the end of that video, I promised to eventually revisit the machine and give it some upgrades. Well, over the past year, I did end up adding and swapping a few parts. First, I acquired a new case from my friend TechNite. It's an InWin A500, and this case is an absolute pleasure to build a vintage machine in. The motherboard is a weird one. It's an Intel PD440FX with the codename Portland. It was used as the mainboard for a few Sony, Toshiba, Dell, HP, and Gateway models. Mine was Gateway branded on the splash screen, but I updated the BIOS, and after that the branding was gone. The CPU is a 266 MHz Pentium 2. I think this board can use something faster, but this is what I had on hand. It's a significant performance jump over the Pentium 200 MMX I switched from. As for a video card, I went with a 4-mag Matrox Millennium. Now this card is pretty out of date for 1998, but I went with it for compatibility reasons. These Matrox cards are well supported by tons of OSs, and as far as 2D performance, it matches or exceeds the S3 Verge card it's replacing. The Matrox card is supplemented by a 3DFX Voodoo 1, specifically a Diamond Monster 3D. Many of the games that were out at the time make use of the 3DFX card, so it's a good one to have. As for a network card, I went with the 3Com 3C905. It's probably the most common PCI network card in existence, and it works with damn near everything. I did get a hold of two more important upgrades that will make playing my favorite game on this machine more convenient and more fun. These would be an AdaptEXE card and a PicoGus. The PicoGus is a really cool sound card made by my friend Ian Scott. He uses a Raspberry Pi Pico to emulate the classic Gravis Ultrasound ISA card. But the really special thing about the PicoGus is that it can also emulate the AdLib, Sound Blaster 2.0, Tandy 3 voice sound, and the CMS Game Blaster. It also has a USB port that emulates an old game port, allowing you to use modern game controllers on old machines. The AdaptEXE SCSI card is the AHA2940. SCSI wasn't super common on PCs, but it wasn't unheard of either, especially in IBM machines or higher-end PCs. These AdaptEXE cards are all over eBay for cheap. Make sure if you get one that it has a BIOS chip on it, so you'll be able to boot from it. This card is definitely the most important piece here because it allows me to use a BlueSCSI. In case you're not familiar, a BlueSCSI is a modern device that allows you to use an SD card instead of a hard drive on any device with a SCSI interface. They work great on samplers, computers, factory equipment, anything with SCSI. The advantage of having a BlueSCSI over alternatives like using compact flash cards is that it works with disk images. I can have a large bank of disk images on the SD card and choose which ones I want to use at any given time by just renaming them. ISO files work great and are simulated as CD-ROM drives, and regular standard IMG files work great for hard drive images. I'm using a GoTech instead of a floppy drive simply out of convenience. It lets you have tons of floppy disk images stored on a USB stick. Finally, I also have a Sound Blaster 16 as a backup card in case I can't get the PicoGus working in any given OS. Gravis Ultrasound drivers are not available for most, and the Sound Blaster cards emulated by the PicoGus would have been super out of date in 1998 and not very well supported. In the interest of playing my favorite game, I've created a bunch of blank disk images. Since all the hardware in here is from right around 1998, I'm going to install a bunch of different OSs of the era, try to get some base disk images of them in a working state. I'm defining working with the following criteria: wave audio working, MIDI working, at least 800 by 600 with 16-bit color working, running a third-party game, and getting on the internet. First things first, I need a mount for the BlueSCSI so I can easily access the SD card to mess with my disk images without having to open up the PC. I fired up Onshape and got to designing. Once I was satisfied, it was time to 3D print it. I like to get fancy with the multicolor stuff, and I've only got a limited amount of the nice beige filament, so I printed all the stuff you can't see in a different color. After it's done printing, I add heat set inserts for anywhere that takes a screw. These are really nice for things that are going to be moved from machine to machine or see a lot of use. It really adds to the durability of the part. In 1981, this guy, and this guy bought the rights to an 8086 clone of CP/M and convinced IBM to license it from them for their new personal computer line and called it MS-DOS. Eventually, an ecosystem grew around that combination and basically became the personal computer industry that we know today. Those three guys eventually expanded on the whole DOS thing by adding a graphical user interface called Windows, and that's what I'm starting this exercise with today, MS-DOS 6.22 and Windows for Workgroups 3.11. We'll skip the DOS install here and go straight to Windows, mostly because I forgot to record the DOS install and hell if I'm going to go back and do it again. We're running this on DOS 6.22 with the Phil's Computer Lab starter pack. I start off by doing a pretty basic install. I removed the network adapter driver here so I can install a new one once I'm booted up into the OS. Once the install is done, I gotta go into config.sys and autoexec.bat to change some paths since the installer was only smart enough to do the first occurrences and not all the subsequent ones put there by the menu system. Looking good so far. Let's get that network card installed along with TCP/IP. Man, there's a lot of rebooting. Gotta test internet connectivity. What you're actually seeing here is my fourth attempt at an install, all because I was having trouble getting the PicoGus in Gravis ultrasound mode working in Windows. I've heard horror stories about how difficult it was to get the original Gravis ultrasound working in Windows 3.11, so I gave up and fell back to the Sound Blaster 16 for this one. Let's check out a game. I don't know if you'll recognize this one, it's kind of obscure. Hey, it's running a game. Back in Windows now, and we've got startup sounds, confirming that we've got the sound card working. Let's tackle video drivers. Amazingly, I downloaded these directly from the Matrox website in December of 2024. And we've got accelerated video at 800 by 600 now too. Perfect. Let's try some MIDI. There we go. First OS installed, and aside from Gravis ultrasound trouble, it looks like a success. Let's see what's next.
That's an everyday task.
Oh hey, it's that guy again.
Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you've plugged in a new device. And it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build... Whoa. Moving right along.
That must be why we're not shipping Windows 98 yet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's time to get to what will probably be the primary OS I run on here most, Windows 98. It's an evolution of the Windows that came before it, and still has all the DOS underpinnings, so it's probably the most capable general-purpose operating system to run on this thing. All of the hardware I'm working with is well supported, so it almost feels like I'm using a cheat code. I thought I'd go for the gold, so I decided to use the PicoGus in Sound Blaster mode from the get-go, but it looks like Windows didn't see it, and manually installing the drivers didn't do the trick. It was at this point that I realized I forgot to turn on plug and play in the BIOS. Maybe now it'll help. Nope. Let's shoot for the moon and see if we can make it work in Gravis ultrasound mode. And let's stick the Sound Blaster 16 in there as a backup in case this doesn't work. While we're at it, let's get a better resolution going here. The Gravis ultrasound driver installation procedure is involved. And that didn't work. Let's try the Sound Blaster 16. The sound works. That's more like it. Does MIDI work? Let's get the DOS side of things squared away. Bill's Computer Lab provides a reboot to MS-DOS shortcut that has its own autoexec.bat and config.sys, so we can have a boot menu just like on my DOS image and really get stuff dialed in. And I think I'm going to configure the PicoGus to work in Gravis ultrasound mode for the DOS side, and just use the Sound Blaster 16 on the Windows side. And that works great. Let's see if we can get sound in a game with the PicoGus here in DOS. Alright, that worked. And MIDI? Perfect. Just a couple more things. Let's get the Windows Plus pack installed. And of course we'll set the Inside Your Computer desktop theme. Now it's time to install the 3DFX drivers and try out GL Quake. Wow, it's like I've been transported back in time. It's exactly how I remember it. Finally, let's see if we're online. That's what I want to see. I call this a success. So far, we're 2 for 2 on checking off all the boxes. They didn't call these computers Wintel for nothing. Let's try something a bit more challenging. Wow, this guy really gets around. In 1985, he engaged in a partnership with IBM to joint develop the next generation operating system for PCs called OS/2. Over the next 5 years, they worked together, sometimes reluctantly, and released some lackluster stuff. In 1990, IBM took sole ownership of the project and took it in their own weird direction.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, from the Starship Voyager, please welcome the newest generation of Star Trek captains, Ms. Kate Mulgrew.
Easy installation, one-button access to the internet, free applications, built-in multimedia, and it's a great place to play games. OS/2 Warp takes you where no man and operating system, check that, man, woman, and operating system have gone before. Computer.
Yes, Captain.
I like that. Let's see if we can make this work again. Lock on to coordinates for the president of IBM's Personal Software Products Division, Lee Reiswig.
Locking on.
Energize.
By the time 1996 rolled around, they were on their 4th full release, and that's what we're going to try to mess with today. OS/2 always fascinated me back then because it seemed so unnecessary. It was this big, complicated system that did the same stuff Windows did and ran Windows applications, so why bother with it? As I grew older and gained an appreciation for the weird, it's become one of my favorite OSs to gawk at. It has pretty splash screens, some of the nicest looking progress bars in the business, and some of the most inconsistent UI designs I've ever seen. Here I'm installing the network card from a 3COM floppy. I've run into an issue with this install, that when it reached this screen it would just sit there forever. As a Hail Mary, I rebooted the machine and thankfully it picked up from where it left off and was no longer stalled. Looks like we now have a working system. Let's get the Gravis ultrasound installed. Wow, I can't believe that worked. These sound effects are insane. This is the default behavior. Welcome to OS/2, the operating system where serious business is done. MIDI is working. It's a little off, but it's making sounds. Let's get accelerated video going. That looks much nicer. Let's try a game. This music is not how I remember it. Yeah, that's not right. At least the sound effects work. Best sound effect in gaming right there. Let's see if we're on the internet. This one surprised me. I thought we were going to have a tough time getting a win with OS 2, but there was very little friction. Let's just see if the MIDI sounds any better with the Sound Blaster 16. Let's just go ahead and move on. In 1991, this nerd was unsatisfied with the availability of modern Unix on the PCs of the time, so he decided to make his own and called it Linux. It grew from a hobby to be a dominant worldwide success over the years. I didn't do a lot of messing around with Linux back then, but I did try Slackware once. I decided to use the Linux-Mandrake distribution this time around, hoping it would be a less painful experience than Slackware was for me on similar hardware. This is a fairly friendly install for the era. No real complicated questions, drive and partition management right in the installer, and no funny stuff to get the SCSI working. My video card is even detected, and I can select the resolution easily without having to mess with mode lines. Network configuration is nice and smooth too. And when we start X, we get a really nice looking KDE desktop. I've got an issue where my mouse doesn't work though. I reached under my desk and unplugged and replugged the mouse and now it works. Weird. It's just a regular Microsoft serial mouse. Doesn't look like it auto-configured the sound card, though. Let's take care of that. Sound config was fairly painless.
Hello, this is Linus Torvalds and I pronounce Linux as Linux.
I went with just the Sound Blaster 16 since the idea of getting a Gravis Ultrasound working on Linux sounded too painful. To get files on here, I set up an NFS share on my modern computer. Let's see if we can get to it. Awesome. Let's try MIDI. Well, that's certainly one way to play that song. There's another MIDI player to try, though. That's the stuff. Now for a test of what Linux was really great at in 1998. Gaming. That's what Quake is supposed to look like, right? Let's test the internet. I'm glad I can use Linux as intended. Another win. In 1985, this guy, who I like to refer to as a tunnel visionary, was basically pissing off everyone at the company he founded, so they fired him and he moved on to create another company with blackjack and hookers called Next. They built some really cool looking workstations running their own version of Unix called NextStep. Their primary market was higher education, and the machines were extremely expensive. Eventually, they transitioned out of the hardware game and released their OS for other platforms, such as commodity PC hardware. Now this one I expect to run into issues. I have no hope of Gravis ultrasound compatibility, so I'm just going to go with the Sound Blaster 16 from the get-go. This wasn't nearly as widely used or supported as the others, so I'm a bit curious how this will work out. After selecting SCSI drivers, we're thrown into the graphical portion of the install, which features my all-time favorite error message caused by actually having today's date set in the BIOS. After setting up the partition, it copies the rest of the installer files to the hard drive. Very slowly. Now it's time to set up the hardware. They've got drivers for my sound card and video card built in. Nice. Let's get the network card working. It's a beta driver that I downloaded from the internet on my modern computer. I made a floppy image and stuck the file on there and put it on my GoTech to get this onto the machine. Networking on OPENSTEP can be a bit weird. Anyone familiar with early versions of Mac OS X will be right at home here with NetInfo Manager. After wrestling with it for a little while, I got it working. After the standard test, I got my NFS share mounted and copied over a web browser, a MIDI player, and a copy of Doom. I banged my head against the MIDI player for longer than I want to admit, but I never got it working. Here's what Doom looked like though. So, not quite a win, but this OS is really interesting and I'll be taking a deeper look at it soon. I might also try Rhapsody on this machine. The hardware support might be a bit more robust. Remember the company that fired their founder because he was being an a-hole? Later on they forced this guy out too. He moved on to form B Incorporated, a new company with similar goals to Next. A new bespoke machine was created called the B-Box, and an advanced operating system to go along with it called BeOS. The machines were based on PowerPC, so it made sense for B to also port their OS to the Macintosh platform. BeOS was poised to replace the aging macOS in the 90s before Apple bought Next instead. At this point, B focused on marketing BeOS for Intel-based PCs. I attempted to install BeOS way back in 1998 and was stuck with black and white video and just didn't have the patience to figure it out. After booting up, the graphical installer starts and it's all very simple and straightforward. It's really quick, and once it's complete, it boots into the system, and I'm relieved that I don't have to mess with anything to get color. Networking is simple to configure as well. Time for a test. So does sound just work? Doesn't look like it. Let's see what we can do. It looks like I'm going to need to find a website to download some drivers from. I don't think my NFS share is going to work here, so I'm going to download some files on my modern machine, stick them in a FAT32 disk image, and then mount that image with the BlueSCSI while I'm in BeOS. Tried to get Samba working, but that was unsuccessful too. Let's change resolutions so we can get some better video. Got the sound card working. Let's test some MIDI. Hey, it works. How about a game? Well, that works too. I really want to play with this some more, but I think I'm going to try it on a Power Mac at some later date. I'm really disappointed in myself for waiting this long to finally mess with BeOS. I'm pretty sure I would have been a die-hard BeOS fanatic back in the day if I'd just given it a little more of a chance back then. In the early 80s, these Canadian dudes started a company to build a lean, real-time Unix-like operating system. Over time, their creation, QNX, became a mainstay in the lightweight embedded OS market. Versions of it are available for many platforms, including standard PC hardware. Now, I never played with this stuff back in the day. I barely even knew what it was, but I do remember playing with Stardock window blinds, a tool that let you install elaborate desktop themes on Windows. These went beyond what you could do with just Windows itself, like adding docks and completely changing window decorations. One of the more popular windowing themes was called QNX, and I loved how it looked, but this is where my awareness of what QNX even was ended. The whole installer is graphical and overall really slick. One annoying issue I had with it though is that each component of the OS is licensed separately, and you have to type in the license key for each one. It's really time consuming. Once it's all licensed up, it copies all the stuff onto the hard drive. All done. Let's reboot and check it out. Well, I did a bit of troubleshooting after this and just couldn't figure out how to get it to boot. I'm not exactly sure how much I'd be able to do with this, so I just gave up at this point. What a shame. In 1982, these guys founded Sun Microsystems in an effort to build robust CAD workstation computers. Their computers ran a variant of BSD Unix until the late 80s, when they combined development efforts with AT&T and their System 5 Release 4. Solaris 2 would use this as a base. Primarily used on SPARC-based servers and workstations, Solaris 2.6 was also available for the x86 platform, and that's the release we'll be trying here. And just to settle a debate I've experienced in the IT space, here's some Sun dudes pronouncing Solaris like I just did.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Schwartz. I'm Chief Executive Officer of Sun Microsystems, and I'm joined today by John Fowler, our Executive Vice President of Systems. Solaris.
My only exposure to Solaris previous to this was as a web server administrator. Our servers ran on Sun servers with Netscape iPlanet. I never interacted with the machines themselves, only through a shell or an FTP client, so this is all going to be new to me. The installer is straightforward enough, and I didn't have to do anything special to progress. Once we're booted up, we can log into CDE, the common desktop environment. Kind of reminds me of OS2 Warp 3, especially the dock at the bottom of the screen. Just like with Linux, my mouse doesn't work, but unplugging it and plugging it back in got me up and running. Must be just something weird with X in this mouse. Networking was fairly easy to set up, pretty much standard Unix stuff like resolve.conf configuration. Got my NFS share up and running, so I tried to get my sound card working for a while, but was ultimately unsuccessful. All the software I could find for Solaris is Spark-based. Seems x86 software is really hard to find. This is where I gave up. Next is KolibriOS, and I guess this one's cheating because it's from 2004. But it works on Pentiums and up, fits on a floppy disk, so I'm doing it anyway. Kolibri was forked from MenuetOS, a similar lightweight alternative OS. This time there isn't even an installer, it's just a live CD. I booted directly into it and my mouse doesn't work. I tried unplugging it and plugging it back in, but to no avail. Tried plugging it into the other serial port and that didn't work either. I guess this is what I deserve for attempting to use an OS that's anachronistic to the machine. And finally, since we're cheating, let's seek forgiveness from the Lord with TempleOS. Oh. So what's the takeaway here? I could come from multiple angles. I could say this is an awesome display of what you can do with a BlueSCSI. I've got a bunch of disk images now of base OS installs that I can do experiments with and just generally play around without being afraid of breaking anything, since I can just restore my base image. I could use this as my jumping off point to express how cool I thought BeOS was in the beginning of my exploration of the continuation of that platform. I'm definitely going to play with it some more. But really all it boils down to is that I got to waste a big chunk of your time with this silly junk, and an even bigger chunk of mine. And isn't that what life is really about? Thanks for watching. If you're interested in watching me do more stupid stuff with computers, stay tuned.